In 1966, Doctor Who's debut Cyberman story, The 10th Planet, saw the destruction of their homeworld Mondas. The year was 1986. Things were set for a change. The first Doctor stepped into the TARDIS and would emerge a brand new person. Just 4 adventures later and 1 new companion plus, the Doctor and his crew would land on the moon of planet Earth. The year 2070, just 84 years after the events of the 10th Planet. And so, for the first time in Doctor Who history, we got ourselves a glimpse of a brand new Cyberman. I mean, really, how can you not love this design? That face, those eyes, that cold, dead stare. Basically a slimline version of everything that the Mondasian Cybermen were. Brilliant stuff. This was the debut of the Cybermen, but it was just more like the thing that we know and love today. Those eccentric voice patterns replaced with something a great deal more robotic. These big clunky guns, ditch them. These guys can shoot lightning from their fingers. Look at them wandering along the surface of the moon in all their monochrome glory. A perfect follow-up to the already creepy introduction of the Mondasian Cybermen in the 10th Planet. A shining example of how, when you cross conception with execution, the Cybermen were one of the best things going in Doctor Who. There's basically nothing not to love here. And call me biased, but personally, I think black and white Cybermen were the best Cybermen. 1967's The Moon Base, the second ever Doctor Who Cyberman story and transmitted only 3 months after the first story, surely cemented Cybermen as a long-term force in Doctor Who to rival the Daleks. And even though the name Telos had no place in this particular story, these would become known as the Telosian Cybermen, or if you like, the Cyber-Telosians. That has a bit of a nicer ring to it, doesn't it? Big props to the animation team for restoring episodes 1 and 3 of the Moon Base, but I much prefer watching episodes 2 and 4 in all their original live action glory. There's nothing about this I don't like, everything just looks amazing. And we all love that scene at the end of episode 2 when Patrick Troughton slowly realises that there might just be a Cyberman in the room with them. Great acting, lots of brilliant suspense, jolly good fun. So let's ask the big question here, how did that turn into that? Well, as far as the 1960s Doctor Who viewer was concerned, it just did. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there was ever any conscious acknowledgement anywhere in classic Doctor Who that recognised that the Cybermen had ever changed from previous encounters. It was just one of those weird things. How they look now is how they always looked. I mean, we know different, right? The only faint glimmer amongst character dialogue that states that maybe they looked a bit different was Polly's arbitrary recognition of them when she first sees one. She kind of insinuates that it looked like a Cyberman, aka it looked like the thing she saw in the 10th Planet that was different. But other than that, nothing. But at least the Moonbase gave us some semblance of continuity. When our heroes get wind of the fact that Cyberman shenanigans are at work on this Moonbase, Ben immediately references the fact that the Cybermen were killed when Mondas blew up. And the weather station commander Jack Hobson states that every child knew what Cybermen were, but they were destroyed long ago. Okay, so everything seems in order there. So how about we get some information straight from the augmented horse's mouth, and trust weather station operative Benoit to ask the right kind of questions. When this Cyberman storms the main control room, Benoit says to him, "But you were all killed." And the Cyberman responds with, "We are going to take over the Gravitron and use it to destroy the surface of the Earth by changing the weather." Cybermen are nothing if not blunt. With no other explanation as to what's going on here and now, the Cybermen continue their plan, only to end up defeated and floating in space. How embarrassing. But this, folks, was 1967, and 1967 was an extremely prolific run for Cybermen. Only 6 months after the moon base was transmitted, and roughly 500 years in story terms, came the third ever Cybermen adventure, still regarded today as one of the all-time Doctor Who classics, The Tomb of the Cybermen. And with it came the first appearance of the planet Telos. Here we go, folks. Telos. Temples and logic, traps and hypnosis, tombs inspired by ancient Egypt. Brilliant set design. This was, of course, the second run of this particular marvellously conceived incarnation, now also including the introduction of these adorable little menaces Cybermats and their big-brained controller. And just like their brothers in the moon base, this particular incarnation of the Cyberman die in a rather gruesome fashion, discharging loads of foam from their chests and occasionally from their mouths. Good job, Jack Kine, who did some of the special effects there, aka the leader. Whilst these tombs were legit nesting ground for the Cybermen, these controls and these gizmos and logic puzzles were designed specifically to entice the more intelligent of the human species. So only the most eligible of human beings would come here, fall for the traps, and furthermore become a new race of Cybermen. The reason for this? Well, it's a simple case of survival. It is revealed that this is set somewhere around 500 years after the events of the moon base, and in this particular story the Cybermen are a lot more vocal about their history. You get this extremely juicy conversation between the cyber controller and the Doctor, where the cyber controller says that their history computer knows all about the Doctor from previous encounters and therefore knows of his intelligence. Turns out the reason why the Cybermen raided the moon base was because their resources were depleted and their machinery had stopped. They're not having a good time here. And the reason why they're not having a good time is because the Doctor destroyed their home planet Mondas. To be fair, the cyber controller's very calm about this. I'd say Princess Leia calm about the fact that the planet has been destroyed. I mean, yeah, they're supposed to be a dispassionate creature, but still, you'd harbour some kind of anger bat. You know, it would be remiss of me to talk about Cybermen in their early stages without mentioning the two men that invented them, Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis. They shared writing duties for the 10th planet, the moon base, and the Tomb of the Cybermen, despite the fact that Kit Pedler is the only one credited for the moon base. Do you think that these guys even had the slightest bit of a notion the long-lasting influence their creatures would have, not just on Doctor Who, but just things in science fiction in general? It's 2022, we're still talking about them. Cybermen are still ace. It's cosmic. Big props to you both. Jerry Davis also wrote the novelizations for these first 3 Cybermen stories, and this is where the legacy of Telos starts to split into 2 separate timelines. Okay, let's rewind back to the moon base, or more specifically, its 1975 novelisation Doctor Who and the Cybermen. That's not the right Cyberman, we know that. I'll get to that in a minute. The Cyberman storms the control room. Weather Station Benoit says, "But you were all killed." No, wait, he doesn't say that, he says this. "But the history books say you were all killed when your planet Mondas exploded in 1986. The first Cyberman had moved into a position where he could watch the activity in the gravitron room. He now turned round to answer Benoit. "We were the first space travellers from Mondas. We left before it was destroyed. We have come from the other Cyberman planet, Telos." The Doctor broke in. "Then you know how Mondas was destroyed. The first Cyberman looked at him. "Yes, and we know what part you played in that. We have returned to take the power you used to destroy Mondas. We are going to take over the gravitron and use it to destroy the surface of the Earth by changing the weather," replied the first Cyberman. So were the Telosian Cybermen descendants of Mondas or a completely separate species? Well, you don't need a massive sprawl of data to tell you that there is a contradiction there. The contradiction is in this paragraph alone. How can you be travellers from Mondas but also have come from Telos? Presumably they left Mondas and then began a settlement on Telos, or maybe they originated from Telos and then colonised Mondas before it was destroyed. We know that that isn't true. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of the book. Target novelizations were great, by the way. Look at these amazing images created by Alan Willow that featured in the original print of this book. Marvellous stuff. Okay, let's see here. The changing face of Doctor Who. Yep, he'll do that. Ben, Polly, veterans of Cybermen in their own right, actually. Jamie, oh, he'll catch up on that quick enough. Okay, here we go. The creation of the Cybermen. Centuries ago by our Earth time, a race of men on the far distant planet of Telos sought immortality. They perfected the art of cybernetics, the reproduction of machine functions in human beings. As bodies became old and diseased, they were replaced limb by limb with plastic and steel. Finally, even the humans achieved their immortality at a terrible price. They became dehumanized monsters, and like human monsters down through all the ages of Earth, they became aware of the lack of love and feeling in their lives and substituted another goal. By the year 2070, they had become as known and feared in the galaxies as the Viking raiders of the 8th, 9th and 10th centuries. It was in that year that a raiding party from Telos directed its attention to a small blue planet in a remote solar system, the Earth. Every planet, they had learnt, had its vulnerable side. The previous time a Cyberman spaceship had landed on the Earth, it had been humiliatingly defeated. So although revenge was not part of their mental makeup any more than the other emotions, the Earth people needed to be taught of Cyberman spaceships landed on the moon at exactly 4:30 AM on October the 5th in the year 2070. Nobody at the lunar base or those manning sky probes at watching stations on the blue planet saw them. So effective were the Cyberman screening devices. The huge silver monsters that had once been men had achieved their first objective. In the same book that acknowledges Mondas, it also wipes it clean from history. Or does it? In the grand scheme of things, us 21st century Doctor Who folk have come to accept rather comfortably that Telos and Mondas were both the product of parallel evolution. Two different worlds, cyber conversion happened on both. Nothing quite like a singular line of dialogue to assist in some high-level retroactive reimagining. That's right, we're going to talk about that bit in The Doctor Falls again. Peter Capaldi sat on a chair in the opening scene and he talks about parallel evolution. Where there are humans, there will also be Cybermen. They always get started. He then lists a bunch of planets, Mondas and Telos being just two of them. So that feeds into that. But then you get all the other stuff in the middle. You see, this was not the first time that something tried to contextualise the unmistakable madness of cyber history in TV Doctor Who. Behold once again the most astoundingly intricate and enjoyable document pertaining to Cybermen, 1988's The Archive Tapes by David Banks. It does its absolute level best to put into context all the things that just didn't make sense, including how it's plausible that these two neomorphic Cybermen could be seen chatting with each other like they're waiting for a bus. Sorry number 12, but this document lends itself heavily to the idea that Telos was a planet that was invaded and taken over by Cybermen, and that the evolution of Cybermen in their various forms happened because of their respective locations and circumstances in time and space. You dig? It's all about survival and adaptation, you see. It consciously acknowledges that each type of Cyberman is a very different cat. Not just that, but the archive tapes also puts all of the events of TV Doctor Who Cybermen stuff in the order that it happened. By that I mean chronological planet Earth order. 10th planet, that wasn't the first time Earth encountered Cybermen. It was this, the invasion, in the 70s. The unit dating controversy, I'm not getting into that. In this audio, these guys are officially recognised as the first divergence of the Cyberman species, aka Cyber Faction. Trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. They left Mondas before it was destroyed and colonised Planet 14. Planet 14 is also mentioned by Capaldi's Doctor as an example of parallel evolution. I'm just going to put that out of my head for now. But the Telosian Cyberman, as we know them by name, are said to be the first evolution of that particular divergence, meaning that they are only Telosian by association, because they invaded Telos. It brings perfectly into context what classic Doctor Who failed miserably to acknowledge. The only reason why this type of Cyberman was on the cover of that book was because that this was the design at the time. It overwrites the concept that these models ever existed. However, they did officially rectify this in a 1981 reprint. Oh no, wait, they're still not quite right. And so we go to what is possibly the most heinous crime in retroactive Cyberman overwriting: 1985's Attack of the Cybermen. A big deal for my money because it's Doctor Who's one and only return to the planet Telos. Telos is now overrun by this type of Cybermen because that's just what Cybermen looked like when they were making Doctor Who in the 80s. They even directly acknowledge that that's the same controller that Toberman lobs across the room in Tomb of the Cybermen. Not destroyed, merely damaged. Look at his head. Well, Mr. David Banks, thank you for turning something so ridiculous into something so cool. You see, it goes like this. Cyber Faction diverges from Mondasian Cyberman. These guys, the Cyber Nomads, as seen in Revenge of the Cybermen, are a divergent of the Divergent. They kickstart the Vogan War and lose. But then they respond to a signal supposedly sent out by the Telosian Cyber Controller after he was damaged. They come to Telos, revive the controller, and in the process create a brand new breed of Cyberman, based on all the best bits of Cyber Nomad and Cyber Telosian. Behold, the Neomorph. See, does make sense. And there you go, the beginning and end point of these guys, the Cyber Telosians. Hopefully now you can understand why I can't mention Telosian Cybermen without mentioning all the other stuff that happened before and after it, and during, and all the diverging stories of what might have happened during that 500-year history. I think the very fact that these guys look so cold and dead and weird and lifeless and robotic, and they talk only about survival and you becoming like us and you becoming one of us, really feeds into the idea that these guys were the most desolate and desperate form of Cybermen, arguably more darker and more lost in their ways than the Mondasian counterparts were. I mean, look at their tombs. All that time frozen in space. It's like they're the lost chapter of cyber lineage, never to be woken up again. I love these guys and I love the history. And as for the truth of Telos itself, we have to accept that there are two different versions. They invaded Telos, they were born in Telos. Both are equally as true. I don't really know how to canonize that, I just think they're cool in different ways. It's Doctor Who. You know, they do mention a history computer, and maybe the history computer tapped into what was going on Mondas, which means they could share the experience of Mondas and the Mondasian history whilst having their own indigenous Telosian history at the same time. That could be a way to explain it. I don't know. It's good that we've got two rather than zero. And we're going to see more and more of these conflicting accounts the more we talk about Telosian Cybermen and the planet of Telos. Because you see, distinguished followers, Telos is an iceberg, and I just blew a little bit of snow off the top of it. The legacy of Telos has become an essential and detailed element of Cyberman history which has been covered in a multitude of expanded titles. It's a big deal, and still gets referenced in Doctor Who canon right up until this very day. For all its narrative wobbly moments and inept Cybermen being funnier than they had any right to be, Attack of the Cybermen can pride itself on being the first story to enrich the history of Telos, and talk about the life forms that inhabited this world before the Cybermen came along, if that's the version of history history you want to take. Silurians? No, we're not getting into that this time. I'm talking about cryons, a species who couldn't live in temperatures above zero and therefore perfected refrigeration technology. Entire cities of the stuff. You see this here? Cryon tech. Cannibalized by Cybermen. In this scene, the Doctor gets all argy-bargy about the fact that Cybermen could have done that anywhere, and then he kind of backpedals because he suddenly remembers that the reason why Cybermen did that was because he destroyed their home world of Mondas. And when you peel back the narrative layers of Attack of the Cybermen in this fashion, it turns out that it's not such a bad Cyberman story after all, even though I have slammed it in previous videos. It even officially recognises that the events of the 10th planet are due to happen just 1 year later on from this story in 1986, and that the Doctor can't fiddle with that due to transgressing the laws of time. Telos and Mondas both converging on the planet Earth within 1 year of each other. Yeah, digest that. Not just that, but these mad neomorphic crumpets are actually trying to change history by destroying Earth and therefore stopping Mondas from being destroyed. The Doctor does indeed point out that if Mondas was never destroyed, they never would have got to this point, but anyway, big old bombs, they fail. Silly Cybermen. Also worthy of note in Attack of the Cybermen are some of the visuals. You get your first ever exterior shot of Telos, which is pretty cool, and some of the landscapes and the models of the bases are pretty cool. I also like the fact that one of the Cryon's parting lines is "We shall survive," which may or may not be linked to the catchphrase used by the Telosian Cybermen in Tomb of the Cybermen. Even if it's not, I like it anyway and choose to interpret that as that. Maybe the bluntest fact that we've learned about Telosian Cybermen and the planet Telos is that it is squashed up in a messy bundle of history that doesn't quite add up. But I gotta say, it's one of my favourites, warts and all. Look at these tombs. They were sat in there for 500 years, waiting for somebody that they could assimilate. Or were they just waiting to be rescued? The TV timeline of Telos, substantiated by the archive tapes, is by no means a complete history of Telos or the Cyber-Telosians. We've got other forms of expanded media to thank for that, and that is where I will be heading in the next video. It's just too dense to cover in this one. I think we need to digest what we've already learned, and this chimp has been chosen for cyber conversion. Until then, have a good one.